All right, today we're talking to Nick Percoco, aka C75, and Jonathan Tomek, aka Sake Bomb. And we're here to talk about Thotcon. For those of you listening, living in the Chicago area, you probably recognize Thotcon as one of the biggest and oldest hacker cons in that area. It has a unique vibe and feel to it, and it draws thousands of people every year. So, Nick, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, our pleasure.
Before we dive into ThoughtCon, can you guys tell us a little bit about yourself in a few words? Nick, you can go first.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Nick Percoco. I'm one of the lead oppers for ThoughtCon. We'll maybe talk about what oppers mean in a little bit, but I've been involved with ThoughtCon since the beginning. So probably going on like 12 years or so. That's what I do for ThoughtCon. My day jobs have been in the security industry for coming up maybe on 25 years. Today, I'm the chief security officer at a cryptocurrency exchange known as Kraken, and I run security and engineering there.
And I'm Jonathan Tomek. I'm with Nick. We started Thotcon, 12 years ago. So, man, just weird to go back that long. And so I'm probably Nick's like secondhand guy when it comes to a lot of random things, when it comes to like swag and admission, the games, the CTF, things like that. So together we kind of make a pretty good team there.
Yeah.
Then and my personal stuff. So I started my company called MadX, and I've been doing a lot of cyber threat analysis and sci-fi cyber to physical discovery of IoT devices.
It's awesome. Right. So you were talking about 12 years ago. Yeah. Where did it all begin for you guys? Why even start a conference?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk a little bit about that. I mean, I think going back, if you roll back the clock even like 13, 14 years ago, I personally was in a place where I was speaking at lots of hacker conferences and security conferences, like all over the place, not even only in the United States, but all over the world. And I think coming back from DEF CON, I don't even remember which DEF CON this would have been, but it would have been a DEF CON, I think in like 2009. I remember I was on a plane and thought, why is there not a hacker conference in Chicago? And there have been like, some conferences that have started and stopped over the years. Like I think there was one called like Chicago Con possibly that existed for a little bit. And then there was just like small little pockets of things, but nothing at the scale, or even just not even really scale, just nothing up sort of the spirit that I think we wanted. Or I wanted, at the beginning, like thinking about what ThoughtCon could be, or like a conference like ThoughtCon could be. And the whole idea was to be very non-commercial, not like this conference where there's like this giant exhibit hall and there's like 50 vendors and then there's like, one track of talks and, you get 6 people in the room because everybody else is just hanging out, being schmoozed by vendors. Like that's not what it sort of wanted. It was more akin to what I experienced down in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, is a conference called You Shot the Sheriff, that's down there. And it was very casual, held at a bar, sort of a top secret location. So I sort of borrowed that from Luis, sort of like the template basically of what I thought, a conference could be in Chicago. It sort of fit, similar city vibe, right? Sao Paulo, Chicago it's sort of similar in that regard. So thought it could work well here in Chicago as well. And really just, thought, okay, well, what should we do with, how would it be organized? What should it be called? And sort of just started going down that path. And then chatted with Saki and a handful of other folks in Chicago and said, hey, let's do this. And then it sort of started from there basically. And that was in, I think, fall of 2009 is when we actually announced it. And then the first event was, April of 2010. So we gave it a lot of runway before we didn't know how many people were going to come. So we sold some tickets. We didn't have any money. So we didn't want to we need to sell the tickets to get some money so that we can reserve the venues and pay for things. So we didn't want to have that sort of model, which was popular and still is popular with like B-Sides, where they raise a whole bunch of sponsorship money to then pay for everything. And then they offer the tickets for like free. I didn't really, we didn't want it to be a vendor conference. So that didn't sort of mold with it. And we didn't want to put up tens of thousands of dollars of our own money, only to find out that like, 20 people were going to show up. Right. Like that didn't work out well either for me personally, even. So that's where it sort of all started, was back in 2009. And I don't actually remember, like, I know Jonathan and I got connected up through just sort of the local, hacker scene in Chicago, I think, at that point.
Yeah. You and I met because it was everybody at Spider Labs, actually. That's what it was. And even though I didn't work there, that's how I ended up getting connected through you, through Jaku, through a bunch of the guys.
Yeah.
And I mean, the scene in Chicago is just so ripe for everybody to have a conference, which is exactly right. Like Chicago kind of just didn't take off as much because, one, it wasn't even in Chicago. It's kind of like in the suburbs. Yep. But we were so itching for something. And yeah, once we got together, I mean, that's why we even had at Joe's Bar. I mean, that was Thotcon 1. It was so perfect because the venue was just, it was so raw. And I think that was why everybody really enjoyed it as so much. I mean, it really kicked off. I mean, we packed that place. That place loved us so much.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Did it meet your expectation, or was it a completely like shattered as soon as it started? Things just kind of were fly by the seat of your pants?
Yeah, I would say, we did a lot of preparation even to leading up, because we had a long time to prepare, right? I think we sold tickets. We've always sold tickets on like October 1st. Now the things have been changed a bit because of COVID and things get shifted around, but like historically, we've always sold our tickets, several months before the event. And so we sort of knew what the attendance was going to be like. We could head off a lot of the problems that you run into at many conferences, even DEF CON, right? DEF CON historically would run out of badges. They'd run out of swag that people wanted. They'd run out of everything. And so you have this like people who just had to pack in, get there early, and like the first, maybe enough badges for like 80% of the people that showed up. And we didn't want that to happen, right? Even though it was small, we could have easily just said, 100 people are going to come. Let's buy 100 t-shirts. Let's buy, 100 badges. And then 130 people come up and show up at the door. And then you're like, here's a paper badge, right, that you can wear. And we didn't want to have that experience. And so there was a lot of planning that went into it, and we sort of overbought. We've always had extra shirts. We've always had extra badges, and we sort of priced that into the model because people actually buy a bunch of extra shirts and badges at the end of the conference. But I would say like that first one, I think I realized that first one, we had something pretty special, at that first one. It just like the venue, the lighting, the screens, like all of that sort of clicked with what we were going for from a theme perspective. And then the population of people that came were the same folks that attended like 2,600 locally every month, that attended like DC 312 every month, that attended the ShySec conferences, not conferences, but meetups. And so like just drawing from that group of people, I think we had like, 130 people, and it was almost like no advertising. I think I posted, the only advertising I did, I think I posted it to full disclosure when like the call for papers. You might be able to find like in the archives of full disclosure, my first email out there, but we did sort of like this call for papers and then advertised it. And then we got some really awesome people to present talks and speak, and and it was a good time. I think everybody had a really great time. And then we just decided to do it once more, and it grew just a little bit. And then I think that's when it sort of started taking off. And people like the demand for like the space and the tickets and the people sort of so we always capped it, but it's always sort of outpaced what we're looking for. And today it's even the same, right? We'll sell tickets out. I think we sold out tickets for this one that we've postponed for, it feels like forever. We sold out this one on October 1st, 2019, in like something like 12 hours or something like that. Like all the tickets were gone. And we still haven't had the event, right? It's sort of, the event's going to be in October of this year. So it's going to be almost 2 years. It's going to be longer than 2 years after we sold the tickets is when we're having the event this time. But they sold out. The demand for it was crazy. Sold out like almost immediately.
Oh yeah. So many people still ask me that, like, hey, do you have any more tickets? I'm like, nope, sorry.
Yeah.
But the very first one we had, I think it was 1 or 2 0 days dropped at our very first conference. and people were so stoked about that. I think that was like something that even kicked it off.
Yeah, I think there
Where
was a 0 day that was dropped in like some forensic
it
tool,
was
wasn't?
Gary
Yeah.
Golem. Gary Golem. He basically nullified all. It was not only FTK but NCase that as soon as anybody did forensics on it, it would basically skip over those files because he knew how to overwrite the specific thing it was searching for. It was pretty cool. It was in
Yeah.
a
It's
shared library. Yeah.
Mark of badge of honor, I would say, right? For your
Mhm.
first con.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was good. And then the other piece, here's a piece that I think is sort of a blessing and like a blessing, but also a curse. Um, it, it, we decided early on that we weren't going to. Well, actually, the first conference we did record talks at the first conference. They never saw the light of day
Right.
because the production of doing all those kind of things and doing it the way we wanted to was just so labor intensive that we decided to scrap it. And so I think there's only one talk that like somehow got like leaked to YouTube at one point in time. And it was, I think it was like Chris Nectar's talk or something like that.
Yeah.
And then it got pulled down. Like basically we went to,
Yeah.
I think it was one of the first talks that got produced where it had like, like the slides and the audio and like the intro and all. It was like very well done. Zach Faisal actually, I think, worked on it, and it was very well done. It was, very high quality, but it was just so labor intensive, I think. And we put one out where we actually gave it to the speakers and we're like, hey, can you review this? And then I think they published it at some point, like years later, which was kind of crazy. So that probably exists. There's probably, and I'm sure Zach probably has like some hard drive of like all the first talks from that conference. It might be interesting to maybe release those at some point, but we decided, and then the second year, I think we just did audio. And then what we learned is that when at our events, things got a little raw and not as like buttoned up and professional as like most of the other conferences. I would say even like DEF CON, right, at that time, right? Because DEF CON, you're on stage in front of like, 3,000 people. There's cameras everywhere. There's reporters. Things are a little more reserved. And we found our events, the speakers, even though these were the same speakers that were speaking at places like DEF CON and Black Hat and RSA and in big conferences that were speaking at our events, they enjoyed, letting loose a little bit and going a little deeper, telling backstories about certain things. And so we made a decision, I think, after Thotcon 2, like no more recordings
Right.
at all. And we haven't. So there is no like video record of like, hundreds of talks, right? Like actually more than that, like maybe 1,000 talks now. There's no video record of them. They don't exist. And the whole idea is you had to be there. You had to be at the event. And that was it. It's sort of like you experience it there live and you remember it and you tell people about it. Maybe you live tweeted about it or something, but there's no way to go back and listen to it. And then also it'll require people to really pick and choose what they wanted to see at the event, especially when we did like when we started doing like multiple tracks. Because at DEF CON, you're like, well, I'm going to go see this talk, but I can always go watch these other two. You really had to think like, is that the real talk you want to go see? Or is it because it's like the most popular person? Or do you want to really go see the topic? And so it also helps out sort of divide up the attendance and some of the tracks because people really, really choose what they want to see versus just all running in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the feel, I mean, I think in general, the feel is intentionally, it feels and looks a little underground, a little, before we get to the visual elements that I do want to talk about because they're really cool. We have to talk about the name, right? I think, because I think for those of you listening, for the listeners of the podcast, might think that Thotcon is spelled THOUGHT, but actually it's spelled THOT, which in popular lingo might mean something else. What's the origin? Of course, this predates any of that. What's the origin of the name Thotcon?
Yeah. Well, it means that hacker over there. No, I'm just kidding. So we predate any of that vernacular that exists today. It basically was me with a United Airlines napkin, just like jotting down names of a potential conference. And I sort of, I knew ChicagoCon had sort of existed, sort of wanted to get away from that. I think I had like ShyCon or something like that was with some ideas, but there was ShySack, and I didn't want to like conflict with that. And then original idea was just the numbers 312con. And I thought, that's sort of generic too. Like, I don't know. It doesn't have like it doesn't feel like a brand. It doesn't feel like something you'd want to, continue to go to for years. And so I was writing down like the words 312 on a piece of paper, and then underlined the TH, and then the O from one, and then the T from the two. And I got thought, and I put ThoughtCon together. And thought that it sounded great, right? Because it's sort of, you could say ThoughtCon and it sounds like thinking and ideas and a conference, but then it's not spelled that way, right? It's spelled different, and that's where it really came from. And the first thing I did when I got off that flight back from DEF CON is I was in the back of the cab, like on Network Solutions, like trying to see if that domain was available, and sure enough, like .org, .com, and .net were all available. So I just bought all three right there, and which is kind of odd, right? Like for that time period, for a 7-character domain name, like you'd think someone would have randomly sucked that one up and been squatting on it by then, but they weren't. So miraculously, we grabbed it and were able to start building a website around it and doing all these things. So
something funny about all of that is, I think it was really like ThoughtCon 4. It had to be, because it was like right after we moved to the new venue. Because we had ThoughtCon for a long time, we had no idea the meaning. The more popular meaning now, which we had on Urban Dictionary for a good long time, until they literally just revoked it, I think like a couple months ago, just so you guys know. So go on Urban Dictionary and upvote ThoughtCon. But we had the after party at this venue, and we had a couple of couples show up really, really dressed up that were obviously not part of the ThoughtCon crowd. And we're like, hey, what's going on? What are you here for? They're like, we're here for the ThoughtCon party. I'm like, oh, well, you're welcome to stay. But they looked around and they saw all these people and thought,
they were dressed to the nines, like dresses and like very flashy tuxedos, right? It was like this whole like get up. It was like pretty incredible. I was like, at first I was like, well, that's pretty cool. Like, some people really got dressed up for this event, but they were really confused when they walked in. Like, what's going on here? There's like there's a lot of dudes in like, t-shirts walking around, right? With like, LED flashing things around their necks and, that kind of stuff. Like, what's going on here? And they clearly, I don't know. I don't even know where they got the average. I have no idea. We still don't know.
We don't know.
Maybe it was on Twitter and someone was tweeting about it, and like it was the early days of this, and maybe there's like a small subgroup that was following that hashtag. It was like, oh, there's a party going on here, let's go. And they just showed up, right? It was like the craziest thing. That was the first time I actually thought that there was anything else that was named that. And I still didn't really quite get it. After that time, it was like, I think it was ThoughtCon 4, right? It was like ThoughtCon 4. And like, that was it. And then like it never crossed my radar after that, probably until like maybe 4 years ago. Or maybe 7. Yeah. So like,
it's a funny thought that there might be somebody out there monitoring the word thought for any hit and then like going to check it out.
But we were in Chicago and we were in an industrial district. I mean, like, what are the odds?
It was like, it seemed like it probably, to anybody who was like monitoring for like this, like some pop-up party, right? Like some kind of pop-up thought party. Like if you're monitoring, like it fit the bill, right? It was like some obscure, Twitter account that has just like weird logos and stuff. And then, or maybe it might've been some obscure Twitter account that told somebody online where it was. And then you look up where it is, and it's like in like a old warehouse, right? Yeah. So you're like, oh, it's like some kind of rave that's going on. Let's go. And it turns out it wasn't, right? It was after party for a hacker conference.
So when I think of ThoughtCon, I mean, sort of shifting gears, but also still in line with the whole abandoned warehouse. When I think of ThoughtCon, I think about the style, the experience, the visual style. When you go to sign up for ThoughtCon, it's all text-based. It's ASCII. There's no visual. There's no GIFs, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it still is.
And the whole feel of it is very very underground to the point where you would not reveal the location, even if it was the same location. You wouldn't reveal it.
Yeah. We don't. We never publish the location. It's never been published by us online ever. Like some other people have, and it's what it is, right? People have done it, but we never. It's never on the tickets. It's never on the ticketing site. Never on the website. Yeah, that was part of the idea.
So there's a real like HackerCon vibe, to use the term liberally. Where did it all come from? And what's it like to keep this going, to keep it up?
Yeah, I mean, the idea that I had even like early on, and like if you look back, you can look at our archives and you can see what the first ThoughtCon website looked like, and it looked very similar to what it looks like today. Now we've like expanded the view, right? Like I think it's like it was like 40 column, like Commodore 64 40 column, kind of like just fit into a screen kind of thing. Was with the first website, but the idea was really just bare bones kind of look and feel. We wove in even from the first one. It was very like, and we also wove in like Chinese and Russian, even into the first one. Like there was always like Chinese or Russian text. And the whole idea was like this like backstory, right? Putting this backstory around the conference that really never existed was like the backstory I sort of mentally wrote was, this is some underground hacker conference, international, where people from all over the world show up. And it's like, there's Russian hackers that come possibly, right? There's Chinese hackers that come possibly. And there's folks from the US that are there as well. That was sort of the implied backstory to it. And sort of put that into the look and feel, into design, even to the point where like, when you first came to the conference, the idea was that everybody got the same things, right? So it was just, like when you go to a conference, you're like, oh, I get this, I get a badge and that's it. Like what we did is, the first conference, you got a bag that had a t-shirt in it with your size. It had a program. It had, one sticker. It had one pencil. It had a pencil sharpener in there. And then all of this was packaged in this black envelope that had a sticker on it that was randomly in, it was like printed in Chinese or Russian or English, sort of overlaid over it. And so that was the sort of like unboxing feel that the first one had. And we tried to carry that across, and we have. There's, things have, it's a little different when you do things with 120 people versus 2,000 people. So some things, just don't scale quite as much. Like individually sealed envelopes, like with stuff in there would take us forever. Now it's more of like, let's toss it in a bag. But we also tried to keep out, if you've noticed in our our swag bag that Jonathan and the team, assemble, right, for everybody. Today they do, in the past it was my wife and I in our basement when it was like, just up to like maybe 400 or 500 attendees. And that just sort of got wildly out of control with 2 people. Now Jonathan has a big team that literally lines up and packs everything. But the whole idea we don't put any vendor swag in there. There's no like there's not like a stress ball that has a vendor logo that gets stuffed in the bag. There's not a brochure. Like you open it up, it is only ThoughtCon. That's it. And that's the idea. It's like you're going to this underground event. And there happens to be some folks that help paid for some things like education sponsors and after party sponsors. And we love that they're supporting us, but we don't want that to change the experience, the initial experience that attendees have. You get your badge, you get your bag, you look through it all. You're not distracted by like pulling out some slick from a vendor, right? Like that's not what you see. It's like, here's the ThoughtCon experience. And then you can go explore and you can interact with folks at the village, or you could see someone at the education, sponsor area and things like that. But the whole idea is just like, and it's been the same. We haven't changed that since forever, right? Like that's the same sort of thing that we carry over, and the same components are in there. And I think people really look forward to that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to keep it just raw, the same way that we remember it. I mean, we constantly think of it as just being, now I guess you could call it retro, but just going back to our childhood when it was being on like BBS and stuff. Like this is our conference, and we want to keep it that way. We don't want any outside influence. We want to always enjoy it the same way that we'll always remember it, which is, I think, part of the big reason why people are so drawn to ThoughtCon is as soon as you get in there, you don't have to deal with anybody but the community itself. Like there's no booths. I mean, we do now have a small area, but even still, it's not like an exhibit hall where you go in there and you get thrown at or you try to avoid it. It's just enjoyable to be at the conference. And then even with that, everything that we've had from even the programs that we've had out there have maintained a very a fun feel to it. Like the very first one was that little piece of paper that we folded in half.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a ride when it comes to keeping that feel, because we even around like the ASCII art and things like that, we which is reflected in our stickers, we put that into our shirts, we put that into the puzzles that we've made. Everything is just revolves around that. And even the art that you'll start seeing at Thotcon is even kind of that nice cyberpunk slash retro slash video game feel.
Yeah. And we've always, and actually, I would say the first couple of years, maybe ThoughtCon 1, maybe ThoughtCon 2, didn't really have, I'm trying to think like when we started like the theming. So we have this baseline theme that's always there, right? The black background, white text. We have the ThoughtCon font. We have the ASCII art on the website, ASCII art in the program. So that's always there, and that hasn't changed over the years. What we also have is, and we've started this, I think, with ThoughtCon 3, I think, is when we started it, which would have been the Atari badges. We started to weave in sort of like an annual theme that sort of like it basically takes ownership of the ThoughtCon overall theme. And so like ThoughtCon 4 was like a Tetris theme. If you look at that, ThoughtCon 5 is when things got like a little wacky, where it was a mashup between Empire Strikes Back, which is the 5, V for Vendetta, and then also V, the TV show. So if you remember the 80s V Alien TV show. And so we have an artist that we work with, that we've been working with since then, maybe prior to that. Actually, it goes before then. I was ThoughtCon 3, we started working with the artist. And so I give her sort of like art direction and say, here's what the theme is going to be. And then her and I sort of riff on it for sometimes a couple of months. Like after ThoughtCon's, this ThoughtCon, after that ThoughtCon's over that year, I usually give it about a month. And then I start emailing her and saying, here's some ideas for the next one. And we sort of theme it based on the number, the hex number. So ThoughtCon 5, we did that stuff. ThoughtCon 6, we did stuff. 7 was like a 007 James Bond theme. And then last year, ThoughtCon A, right? That was the 18. And we had and so then we always sort of mash up things. And so what we have is, like you can see here, the mashup of, this was the Guy Fawkes Stormtrooper, so the V Trooper, and he became sort of like the underlying mascot as well. So we had this underlying theme that always existed. And then when ThoughtCon 5 came around, we had this V Trooper that sort of popped up, and people really liked the V Trooper. Like people kept asking, can I get a V Trooper t-shirt? Can I get? And so then we're like, oh, there's people sort of connected with that. And then from there, basically, we sort of left that character exist on its own. So now we have the underlying theme, we have the V Trooper that always exists, and now we have another theme that sort of piles on top. And so the 18 theme was a mashup between Mr. T and the V Trooper. Yeah. And so the t-shirts were like this Mr. T V Trooper kind of thing. And we have a similar sort of mashup for ThoughtCon B that's coming up, but we're not gonna spoil that. People have to see that when they show up in October.
I have the Mr. T Trooper somewhere on my the t-shirt is somewhere on my clothing rack. It's a really great design. Just to put things in perspective, by the way, we said this is going to be the 12th year or 11th year, not counting 11. The one that's not counting the one that we missed because of COVID. How many people are attending this next one?
Looks like about 1,800. Looks like we'll have about 1,800. Yeah. I think we sold like about 1,700 tickets, or total tickets were issued, and then you include the speakers and you include the oppers. And so I mentioned oppers earlier. So oppers are volunteers at the event.
Yeah. So we talked about the V Trooper. You're talking about oppers. There's a lot of lingo. There's a lot of things that develop inside the organization. What are some of these things? You
So,
wanted to mention the oppers, but what else?
yeah, so oppers are one, right? Those are the volunteers. And so like Jonathan, myself, or some of the lead oppers. We have other lead oppers as well that run essentially like departments within the event, or multiple departments in most cases. And then we have oppers who are essentially the volunteers. So I would say equate oppers to like goons at DEF CON. If you're familiar with the concept of goons at DEF CON, that's what oppers are at Thotcon. And we don't have, we have a small number. It's not like there's hundreds of oppers at the event. I think 45 is usually about the max that we have. And so people divide and conquer on the day before the event for the setup, and then the 2 days of the event to make sure that it runs smoothly. And most of us have done it so many times that we sort of know what to do. Like, what do we do during setup? What do we do during the event? What do we do? How do we break everything down and get it out of there? So it's like, it's become pretty routine for us now.
What other things do you feel are unique to ThoughtCon that you just kind of made up along the way?
I don't know. I would say, some of the stuff that I think, even though the badges, I would say, are not maybe necessarily 100% unique. I know DEF CON's had electronic badges. We've also been doing electronic badges for quite a bit of time. We have had some very interactive badges, which predates anybody else's, I think, events, even DEF CON. We had, our first really interactive badge was ThoughtCon 4, where it was a LED screen, like a grid of LEDs. And the theme was Tetris. And so when you walked around the conference and you visited different places, the wireless proximity that was being used on those badges, it had Wi-Fi, and it also had, I don't know if it was NFC, it was something else that was being used. I can't remember on the badge.
It was NFC.
Yeah. And so when you walked in, so it was Wi-Fi and that. So when you walked into a specific room, you would interact with like basically the room tower in that room. And your badge would flash, and it would basically unlock an achievement. And so it was very interactive, like, sort of in the space, also with the badge around your neck. And then we also can send messages to those badges.
It was IR. It was IR. Because I remember that was the first year that we tried to do all of that, and we were trying to figure out how to send the messages, and we did figure it out.
Yeah. So we can send mass messages as well. And so and my badge itself, like, when I walked around, the guys who built it put a special mode on mine that when my badge reset, it would broadcast a message, and it would say, like, it would scroll across people's screens. Their screens would flash like 3 times, and it would scroll across and say, "Buy C75 a beer," is what it would say across their badge. But yeah, so we did very interactive badges, even to the point where, like, ThoughtCon A, we did probably the first badge with actually audio on it, with a speaker. Not the greatest idea, but it worked out fairly well, where we had predefined audio that was stored on the badges. People could hack them and put other audio, but we had predefined audio files that were on the badges. And then at the conference itself, we had like an IRC channel that, like, myself and I know Jonathan and some other folks were on, and we could issue commands that would get broadcast over Wi-Fi to all the badges. So all the badges were actually on a special Wi-Fi network, and we can tell them to do things like flash lights in a certain way or play audio in a certain way. And so like, we've done a lot of that. So we really try to make the badges like interactive, more than just sort of walking around and being like, "Oh, this is really cool." And I think that predated a lot of the events. And I know one of the more recent DEF CONs, there was a bit of that, like, more interactive of, like, getting in touch with people, or, unlocking certain things by going different places. But we did that years ago. I mean, almost, 8-9 years ago.
You can laugh because we actually influenced that, Nick. I don't know if you knew the connection point on that.
I did not know that. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you go back, so when we started doing all of that stuff, so first off, all of our badges are local. Like, we do it within Chicago, the designing and stuff, not necessarily the production, but the design is all
production's in the Chicago area. Yeah. And we never ship off to China or someplace like that for production. Yeah.
Which is awesome. But what happened and how the influence happened is, so we had one of the attendees at Gotsman who started CypherCon in Milwaukee. the toy makers did their badges, and that was the group that actually did the interactive badges at DEF CON.
Oh, wow.
So you can see
That's
that
cool.
chain if a lot of people probably didn't know that.
I mean, there's one thing that stands out. Jonathan, you were talking about being in charge of games and things like that. One thing I think is really front and center is the puzzles. You guys mentioned that. But as soon as you open the program, there's puzzles. There's like
always
strings. How did that come about? And you know, they are some serious puzzles. How do you guys do that? How do you develop that?
That is what we are. That's being curious. You know, everybody always wants to learn, so you got to hide stuff, and gives people something to look at. Gives you the ability to start hacking away. I mean, whether it's hiding some ciphers in there, or just, hey, I want to go connect to this server and see what's on there. And that's been the whole intent of literally all of the puzzles is let's hide it in the program. That's always the way to start and learn something new. I mean, other than it being just a community conference, like the puzzles are super intricate because everybody wants to have some ability to say, hey, I did that. I was there for that, to understand whether it's getting your ham radio license so you can start broadcasting stuff, because we had some badges that did that, because even with those puzzles, they interact with the badge. And it's, at least from my perspective, I want you to come out of there with something to say, hey, I've gotten better in some way, or there's something I didn't even know about. And the grading of how difficult the puzzles are is just based upon us how far you want to go. So you kind of have to work together with some people that might not know it. I mean, I remember one of like just the cipher puzzles. It was like a 10-phase step that was literally in the badge. It was just on the top row. And I forget, that was probably one of the first years you attended there. And that basically went through every different language. And you finally got to the final answer. And it was like, hey, just try it, you know, something to do.
How many of these things, I mean, is this a kind of a rabbit hole for you? Do you brush up on your cryptology every ThoughtCon, trying to find new ways of?
You better believe it. I think the one thing you can say, and I think this will go the same thing for Nick, is it's incredibly more difficult to be a teacher or that leader, because you have to be able to broaden your mindset over everything that's going on. So you have to know a lot in order to teach people, but you also have to know how to be within your theme of the year too. So you don't want to stray. You want to kind of keep people on a path. But I'm constantly coming up with puzzle concepts or different crypto puzzles that, one, are solvable and not like crazy obscure, but two, can somehow make somebody go, okay, I see the rational, I see the plan and how this is going to like unfold itself.
So switching gears again, going back in time to the first few ThoughtCons. Were there any memorable moments in those few ThoughtCons, memorable talks or experiences that you guys remember?
Yeah, there's probably a few we shouldn't talk about, maybe.
We got to talk about one that's just at least really hysterical, about the boxing match after the UFC fights.
Oh yeah.
So that's a good first one. That's PG-ish.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll tell a little bit about it, and then maybe Jonathan, you might have more details in it. But I think it happened. Did it happen? It was only after ThoughtCon 2, right?
It was after 2.
Yeah. So we had at this bar called Joe's Bar in Chicago that is still around. That had sort of evolved. I think it used to be like a sports bar, but then it sort of evolved into like a country bar. And then also would have like these obscure, like other kind of events that they would host in there. Because it was a unique space. It was literally like a large room, lots of televisions all over the place, floor painted black, ceiling painted black. It was like almost like this sort of like a theater kind of feel to it, but it was a bar as well. Like it was a bar, like a sports bar kind of feel. And they told us going into it that we needed to be done by like a certain time. It might've been like 6 o'clock. Like we only had it for one day. This is when the event was only one day. It was on a Friday, one day, and that's it. It was not 2 days. And they told us we needed to be done because they needed to set up for an event that evening. And I don't think they told us what the event was. I'm pretty sure. And so like right at like, cause we had to be done at 6, but like right at like 5:40 or maybe 5:30, these people started bringing in like chain link fences, right? Yeah. And like stage material, like sort of like risers and like all this kind of stuff. They started bringing it in and like just sort of like putting it in like the doorway, like getting into like where we are. And it was just sort of, okay, we're closing up, we're talking about stuff. And then we had this VIP area that we had that was upstairs that overlooked the stage area. And people were up there finishing up their drinks. And all of a sudden, like all of these girls in like different costumes started showing up. Like, wasn't it like Snow White? There was like all these different costumes and they started showing up. And basically this was like this like women's wrestling cage match kind of thing that was going to happen at the venue after we were done. And I think there might've been like guys as well that were going to fight, but it was this whole like real crazy thing. It was like amateur cage match fighting. And while we were cleaning up, they were like just pushing the chairs away and like setting up these like caged walls for like the stage that was going to go in the middle of the room. It was pretty crazy.
Oh yeah. Everybody was asking us like, is this what happens after Thotcon every year? Like, is this the next part? Is this the after party?
Is this the after party? Yeah.
Nobody knew.
Yeah.
Oh man.
It was like, we had no idea what was going on. People were asking us and we were like really confused about like why there was like this cage match that was forming. And they're like, oh yeah, that's what we scheduled after your event. And so then I think after that, we were like the next year, we moved venues, but we were like, there cannot be an event after our event. Like we need to be able to book the whole venue for the whole day. No events afterwards. And so what we ended up doing, I think in Thotcon 3, it was at Thotcon 3, maybe even Thotcon 4, maybe 5 as well. I don't know. We had like our after party at the venue. The venue was big enough that we were able to convert the whole venue into an after party. So we didn't run into that situation, except for one year at that other venue, we ended up having a wedding.
Yeah.
So there was a wedding on like the first night or the second night. I don't remember what, I think it was after
it was a second night.
Yeah. So it turned out that like after it was pretty crazy. We needed to like get out of a specific space at the venue and remove all our stuff because there was a wedding that was going on in one of the areas. So imagine like, and this has happened actually at like other events, even at DEF CON. I know we had closed down like one village room because it was like a 90 or 100-year-old birthday party that was booked like a decade before, right? And they couldn't cancel it. So, something crazy like that. But like literally there was like this one room is going to be the wedding reception. And then this is going to be like the dinner room. And so you guys need to shut down those rooms at this time and get things out of there. But I do know that we didn't quite remove all of our stuff because of the timing and so some of the guys from like the network team were literally like during like the wedding reception, were like crawling in the corner and like pulling cables, like crawling across the back of the room and like just pulling cables and untaping cables and things like that, and removing access points. So, but yeah, there was that wedding. But I remember the rehearsal dinner, the bride and her friends were not super thrilled that we were doing the setup, and she was really concerned like what was going on like at the same place as like her wedding, which made it pretty entertaining.
Oh, yeah.
Like
we had an earful on that one.
Yeah, it was like there's this other event, like literally it was not like we were separated by like like down the block. It was literally like, imagine having your wedding. It was basically the room that they had was like in the middle of our entire conference. So imagine like having your wedding like and not expecting it and not being from the hacker community, having your wedding at Thotcon or in the middle of DEF CON or something like that. That would not be too enjoyable. And
man, Joe's Bar, man, that was the only place in town for every event. That's insane.
Yeah, we at our very first year, we even had some guy starting to DDoS. Or no, it wasn't even DDoS the network. He was just trying to hack the whole network. And we're looking around trying to find this dude. Like everybody's complaining, like, what's going on? Why is the internet down? And we barely had like internet at that first conference anyway. That was a hard pull. And we ended up looking around with security guys, like, where is this dude? Where's this dude? Trying to figure out what's going on. And he's sitting at the table with I don't even know, it was like the high boy by the bar. We're like, that was like the first major security event we had at Thotcon 1. We're like, what the heck? Why is this one guy doing this? Like, the guy, he had like no good reason to. He's like, I thought this was a hacker con. I thought this was all cool. Oh man, those are ridiculous. But that also, after that whole day, that's what ended up starting the after party when we were going to Neo. That was that's why it became that Neo night. And this is well before Neo closed for everybody. So we wanted to keep that whole feel to it. So that's how that also began.
Maybe for some of the people who are listening, maybe you could explain what Neo is, because they might not know.
Oh, and like, man, you're right.
And sort of what's the connection to the hacker world?
This is a fun one. So if anybody, well, everybody should be familiar with the Matrix. The Wachowski sisters attended the Neo nightclub for years. I mean, it was a staple of Chicago scene. Like, and the club, if you really want to get a feel for it, is when you first watch the Matrix, when he says when they say follow the white rabbit, and you go into that club, that feeling right there is literally what Neo, that club, was. It was underground, down a back alley. You would not have known it was there. It's in like middle of a street that you're just like, oh, hey, it's all nice retail stuff. But you go down this alley and you walk in there and you're like, wait, this is where we are. What's going on? And it's if anything could be more like industrial cyberpunk feeling, this is exactly what it was. It goes back to all of our youth, and which is why we were so excited about it. But it just became like this after party where everybody could just be completely free and enjoy industrial music, enjoy like EBM, EDM, and that's actually the same feeling that we've been going for throughout Thotcon. I mean, I kind of weave some of that into like the programs and stuff, but that is, I mean, that's always been us. So if you haven't attended, definitely recommend it, but it's also kind of, it might not be for everybody, but who cares? I mean, it's something that's a lot of fun, but we still, since Neo has closed, which is now, I think it's like children's daycare,
which is pretty crazy.
Yeah,
like taking your kids to there, and I'm sure they had they had to really clean that place up. But but imagine like people unknowingly in Lincoln Park in Chicago, like, hey, there's this new great daycare. They have no idea that they're taking their kids to what used to be Neo.
So. Oh yeah. So what we ended up doing now is every year now we find a venue and we remake a Neo night, even with the same old DJs and everything, and have a lot of the same old attendees that come. And this includes like the scene formerly from Chicago that used to attend Neo too. So it becomes like all around a really, really great night.
That's awesome. And a really, really nice way to, I think, end the conversation. And I kind of wanted to end on a future looking note. I was thinking about asking you guys, what do you think is the impact that you've made on the community around you? And what are you looking forward to in the future?
Yeah. So I'll maybe take from my perspective, the one thing that I get the most out of Thotcon are the people that I've met and then reconnected with over the course of the year, or many years that we've been running it. So there's countless numbers of people that I've met or seen at like one of the early ThoughtCons, or even just different ThoughtCons over the years, who have like met up with me, or like walked up to me at other events, who have said things like, "Hey, my first hacker conference ever was ThoughtCon. And the first time I ever went to a hacker conference, and now I'm speaking at DEF CON this week." Right. Or they've said things like, I was a Windows administrator at a bank in Chicago, and was really interested in security, but really couldn't get into security in my bank. Like, it was sort of like this wall that I couldn't get past. So I decided to take it upon myself, and I bought tickets to ThoughtCon. I attended a bunch of talks. I met a bunch of people, and now I'm in security at this other organization because of the things that I learned, or the people I connected with. And so that's where I think where the biggest impact. It's really given people opportunities or created opportunities for people in the Chicago community, but also in the global community who have come and attended. And there's people have really, really utilized it and took advantage of the people, the networking, the ability to maybe even just put that they spoke at Thotcon on their resume, whatever it may be, or someone, they participated in one of Jonathan's contests, right? Or Jaku's contest, right? And they're able to get something from it and get it exposed to something that set them off on a different path. And, when you just run a conference for like maybe 1 or 2 years and end it, you don't really get to see that impact. But since this has been around for a decade, there are people who started coming to ThoughtCon when they were like 17 years old who are now almost 30, right? So they're now getting into like the mid-career, and it can tell us like how they got into the community, got into the industry, and are now doing great things, which is really, really exciting and awesome to see.
Yeah, I love making sure that the community is always growing. This is our way of like giving back, but also enjoying it for ourselves, because everybody that's there wants to be there. And it's always fantastic to see, like Nick was saying, like the people that were starting when they were young that are now coming here and they're like, yeah, I was this kid in high school, or I was like just somebody that I really didn't know much about security, but you guys just opened our eyes to what could be, and just the complete networking element of it. But what's so cool about ThoughtCon, which I never really would have thought possible, that other than it just being like a localized Chicago conference, which is originally our core goal, it kind of became international. That like I've been to Taiwan and I've been to HitCon, and they're like, oh yeah, you work at ThoughtCon? I'm like, yeah. Like, how do you know who I am? I'm in Taiwan. They're like, oh, I've been there. I know people that went there. I'm like, you're on the other side of the world. How do you even know about this? But it's really wild to just see how the influence spreads about the community, and just seeing people grow and keeping that cultivated. Because I've met many people now that are just so excited about just not only growing and learning something new, but bringing others into the community. And this is why we keep it as raw, why we keep it as like old school as possible, is because everybody really resonates with that is in the hacker community. And with that, like keeping that community going is probably my favorite thing about it, because it's something that I love the nostalgia of it, but so does everybody else. So it kind of keeps us all really tied together.
Yeah. And I guess one thing to also add, I mean, it's something I reflected on recently, diversity and in representing, people from different backgrounds or different identities has always been a thing of ThoughtCon. Like if you look even at our history, like we were probably some of the earlier conference to have women speakers at a hacker conference, right? And if you look even at the attendees, just walking around the halls, you're going to find people from all ages, everything from 16 years old to 85 years old, right? You'll see people from that range, and all genders, all races attend our events. It's definitely not just like a bunch of bros sitting around in a room, right? Like it's very like Hacker Bros or some kind of conference like that. Like it is a very diverse conference, and we didn't really do anything out of the ordinary to create that. We just didn't do anything to not create it as well, right? Like that's I think that's sort of what has created sort of ThoughtCon over the years, how it sort of evolved. We didn't artificially try to create something. It just sort of evolved. And I think it being in Chicago, in the city, that's a very diverse city, sort of contribute to that as well. Like if we were to just be in a small town in the middle of nowhere, it probably would not have the same cultural impact or cultural vibe as well.
That's amazing. And that's a great note to end the conversation. I really appreciate you guys. This was a really fun conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.